thank you for having us tonight. I guess we'll just jump right into everything. So I think the first question is how and when the Pullens ended up in Mentone. So, Linda, Walt?
That's Walt.
Okay, back in 1918, some of y'all remember Hardy and Maud Jones, who is Ronnie Jones's grandparents. Maud was a Catholic. Their family came from Polk County, Georgia. Well, the Cockwitts moved to Mentone, and then sometime later, some of the rest of the Cockwitt family came, and they got my granddad Pullen to move them out here. And he was so impressed with the place that he just went back home and moved his family out here. So the Pullens have been here since 1918. That's how they wound up here.
So how about the Granny Gracie side, the green side?
Okay, my mom's dad was a Green. They came to the Mentone area in the early 1880s, probably. There's several children, and Granddaddy was the second to the youngest, I guess. He was born in 1885. He was the first one of the kids that was born in the area here. And so they've been here, the Greens have been here since the early 1880s. And let's see,
Granddad Green married a Shigley.
Oh.
And the Shigleys came from Michigan in
The early
1880s.
Yeah.
And Grandma Shigley was a Keith, and the Keiths came to settled in the valley about 1820. So some of our families been in this area for 200 years.
Wow. It's a good while. So how did Granny and Pappy, your parents, how did they meet in all of this?
Probably at church. But they have a beautiful love story because my mother was 15 and Daddy was 25 when they started, as they would call it then, courting. And my grandmother didn't much like the idea of her going with this man. So she sent her off to go to South Carolina. But she only stayed one semester and came home. And Robert was born about the time that Mother came back from South Carolina. She wouldn't go back to school because she had a baby brother. And she liked Daddy. And so they were talking about getting married in 1941. And then Pearl Harbor happened. And Daddy went to the Navy. And she waited for him 4 years till he came back in 1945, and they got married. The next year I was born. 2 years after that, Walt was born. I was born in October. He was born in October. The next October after Walt was born, our sister Ann was born. The next October, Kay was born. And then a couple of years later, Bob came along in January. And one time, some of y'all may not remember Catherine Bain. She liked to ask people embarrassing questions. And so she asked Daddy one time why all of his and Mother's kids were born in October. And he said, well, that's simple. January's a cold month, on lookout now.
And the October birthdays continued on through.
And Laura's born in October.
Yeah, I was born in October. Helen, who married in, her birthday's in October, and then some of the other cousins and whatnot. So apparently, January's cold everywhere. So what were your childhoods like? What was it like growing up in this area? And, like, what kind of games and activities did y'all have when you were kids that you did?
Well, thought we had a perfect childhood. We had, you know, built-in playmates in the family. We had the whole woods to play in.
Well, now, we started out in town,
Yeah.
up in the city, downtown Mentone. And the traffic was beginning to get worse, and they couldn't keep me at home.
That's true.
And so Daddy bought part of the old dream place over in the country at the time and to get me out of the city.
Now, is that, do they call that Nottingdale? Is that what they used to call that? Or
Well,
is that-
Bankhead, between Nightingale and Bankhead.
Gotcha.
We'd start off every year when school was out by building a dam across the creek, which is not a very big creek, but we'd make it deeper so we could play in it.
And then it dried up.
Yeah, we made playhouses in the woods. We'd have animal funerals. We would, what else did we do?
Well, me and Brother Bob, we made roads and had our trucks and toys. We made roads all over the yard. Back then, you didn't mow the yard, you just kind of kept the weeds down.
And so you tried to help with that?
Well, I guess that's part of it.
And my sisters and I would play dolls and paper dolls. And we had stairs in our house, so we'd have paper doll houses all up and down the stair steps. Then Walt and Bob would come through and mess up all of our paper dolls.
So what year did Pappy build, or what year did Pappy's house get built?
Probably in 54,
They started in 50.
53.
Yeah, we moved in December of 53.
Well, we didn't move in the big house.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, we did?
We moved.
I don't remember that.
That's a
Well,
story.
you were little.
Well, I was 6 when we moved from Mentone over there, and we lived in what was going to be Daddy's garage for that first summer. And then the house wasn't finished, but we went ahead and moved in it that fall. I think it had just gotten on Mama's nerves with 5 little kids in that 24 by 24 block house.
So outside of your homes, like in the area, in the community, what was that like at that point of time? I know you said like the big town of Mentone, but I think that was even smaller than what it is today.
Everybody knew everybody.
Yeah, we had the only telephone between Mentone and the Georgia line, I think.
For a while, yeah.
And all the neighbors always came to our house to use the telephone. And we got to know everybody's problems firsthand.
The community was, like everybody knew everybody helped each other out. You shared your garden vegetables, you shared your joys and sorrows, and, it was just a community, a real community. And you had a sense of belonging, a sense of caring. And I thought everybody loved me.
In the summertime, we spent all summer going to Bible schools. Every church had, back then, most of them had a 2-week Bible school.
Sometimes.
So Mama would make sure we went to Bible school all summer. Give her a little rest. So we went to, there's 4 or 5 churches. We went to that many Bible schools all summer.
So when y'all were younger and until the point of time y'all would leave, y'all would move out and y'all are grown, what did Granny and Pappy do for work, for employment?
Well, when we was little, Dad was a carpenter. His dad was a carpenter before him, and they built a lot of the older houses around Mentone. And I guess it got to where carpenter work wasn't regular enough, but he got a regular job at the cotton mill in Trine in 58, wasn't it? I believe it's something like 58. And he worked over there till he retired. And Mom always stayed home, and she had a pretty good job at home.
I can imagine. So what was, with her being, stay-at-home mom, what is, well, we'll start with Aunt Linda. So what was one of your, what was one of your most influential memories of Granny, of your mom? Mm-hmm.
Her patience and her contentment. I would tell her all the time, we needed something, you know what, we needed a better piece of furniture, we needed to go somewhere, and she was always, what we have is good enough. And, I admire that now. It made me mad then, but I admire it now. And then, she had the patience to teach my sisters and me to sew and cook and do all those kind of things. How to hoe the garden and, don't cut down the beans, just get the weeds, And so sewing is a family tradition that apparently got passed down, because we brought some quilts tonight. This first one is from our great-grandmother Pullen, who passed away in 1889. That's my daddy's grandmother. And the middle one is from our grandmother, who passed away in December of 54. And this one on the end is one that our mother made.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, the same question, but for Pappy. What was your most influential thing about Pappy? Memory of Pappy?
His stories. Our daddy was a storyteller, and he was so funny. We didn't have a TV. He thought that we shouldn't have a TV until we got through school, because he wanted us to do well in school. So,
He bought us a set of encyclopedias.
yeah, he did. He bought us a set of encyclopedias, and Walt and I used to see what we could find out that the other one didn't know. But he would sit around at night after we got through with our homework and tell us stories. And they were, some of them got repeated many times, but they were still, we enjoyed listening to Daddy's stories.
I can remember when we was little, and Mother didn't have she may have had a washing machine, but I can remember her heating the water in a cast iron tub out in the yard to heat water to wash clothes in. And I can remember her out there washing clothes singing.
Aww.
And one of her songs was,
Oh, what a beautiful morning.
Oh, what a beautiful morning. Her out there washing clothes in a wash tub.
That's a good memory. What about Pappy?
Well, his work ethics, he, of course, always had a regular job, but he was always working at home built a house essentially by himself. And when he died, the house still wasn't finished, but he's still working on it. But his work ethics is something that has impressed me, and I hope that a lot of it rubbed off on me. But he always had a big garden, and always grew peanuts. When the family moved to Alabama in 1918, they brought their peanut seed with them from Georgia, and until probably 2 years ago, it was Alabama peanuts grew on Lookout Mountain, and I kind of dropped the ball. I planted them, but they didn't come up, so I don't know what's happened to the Alabama peanuts.
Wow. So I know both of you said some things about the gardens. I know that's one thing that us as grandchildren, my cousins, myself, my brother, during the summers, I'm sure even during the fall when we had school, we were put to work in the garden as well. We were digging potatoes. I hated shucking corn. I hated finding the worms, those silkworms in the corn. I hated that part, but digging potatoes were probably my favorite. I remember we still had an actual outhouse out next to the barn with the gardens. So there's a lot of things from then that still passed through to my generation. I remember the old wash tub Granny had, not the cast iron one, but the old white one with the washboard on it. And she still had that along with her regular washing machine when I was a child. So she was very content with what she had. What were meal times like? With having a garden.
We never went hungry.
Mealtime was regular. I mean, you could almost say
And everybody was there too.
everybody, and a lot of times a few extras. And we all sat around the table. We said the blessing. We ate homegrown vegetables, sometimes homegrown chickens and eggs, and we all stayed and talked until we were excused from the table. It was like you see on Mayberry or something.
I know, of course, Granny was semi-famous for her cakes and candies and things that she would make. What's your favorite thing that Granny would make? Or the thing you remember the most, maybe?
I remember the Christmas candy. She would start several weeks before Christmas and start making candy, and she would save her box. She was always sending cards to people, and she'd get these boxed cards, and she would save the boxes, and then she would put homemade candy in them, and all of our teachers would get one.
The mail carrier.
The mail carrier, the milkman, the preacher, Sunday school teachers. Everybody got some Miss Gracie's homemade candy for Christmas.
What about you, Dan?
Her homemade fruit cakes, which she started in July, I guess, wasn't it? I mean, real early. And she'd make her fruit cakes and put them up on the shelf in the pantry till Christmas.
That's
I
great.
reckon they aged.
Maybe that's why they're so good. I remember Granny telling a story of asking what kind of cakes you guys would want for your birthdays.
Yes.
She would ask us the same as well when we were children. One of her favorites to tell you is you were like maybe 2 or 3, and you wanted boo cake and boo ice cream.
And I got blue cake and blue ice cream.
So what about in this area? What was the education like? What was offered at that time?
Moon Lake.
Did that go all the way to like graduating?
No, just through 6th grade. Well, when you...
It went to the 8th grade until I got in the 7th grade, and then they started sending everybody past 6th grade to Valley Head. So I went 7 through 7th grade at Moon Lake. And then we went to Valley Head, and then we graduated. Then they opened Northeast, and we got to go to Northeast.
I always said everything I knew I learned at Moon Lake. All that other just marking time.
What were some of your favorite subjects, and maybe your favorite teacher, and what you learned especially from that teacher?
My favorite was recess. I kind of like history and geography. I wasn't too good at math and wasn't good at all at English. I mean, I got by, but that's just barely.
What about your teacher?
Teacher, a favorite.
My favorite teacher, well, it definitely wasn't Miss Foy Jones. There's people here kin to her.
I will tell on you, what I was in the 3rd grade when Walt started to school, and somebody would come around and say, Miss Foy's paddling your brother. And I would say, oh no.
I guess my favorite teacher at Moon Lake is probably Ovie Carr, because well, I guess he was a good teacher, but he wasn't real demanding, and he liked to entertain us. He's a short, fat guy, and he could turn upside down and walk on his hands. And just every few days, he'd put on a demonstration for us, and walk around in front of the classroom upside down.
It's funny you said that, because Pappy, that was one of his things, was sitting on his head.
Was he?
He would stand on that.
Yeah, we've got some funny pictures.
And then after we got to Valley Head, I guess my favorite teacher in there was Miss Bernice Martin. Sharon remembers Miss Martin. She wasn't necessarily my best favorite teacher at school, but after I got out of school, we became real good friends. And I just admired her a whole lot, because she put up with a lot.
In elementary school, I think I liked every subject. And I loved to read. And I remember one time the PTA bought a set of biographies. They would have blue covers on them. I bet Marshall remembers them. And I read every one of them. I just thought those were so interesting to read about all these people. And my favorite teacher was probably Miss Adams, who died, and her husband married my grandma. That's another story. But but she was, I really liked Miss Adams for a teacher. And then in high school, I had several favorite teachers, but I liked Miss Martin too. She was a hoot. And she was a good English teacher, but she was a character.
I remember her. Do you think your experience with the education you got at Moon Lake influenced you to be a teacher yourself?
Possibly. That's not what I had planned to do, but that's what I wound up doing. And we had a teacher named Mr. Pat Priest when I was in the 7th grade. And then he went to Valley Head and taught my math in the 8th grade and my English in the 9th grade. So he was a very interesting fellow. He had come here from Florida and worked at Camp Cloudmont. And then he decided to stay all year, and he taught at Moon Lake and then Valley Head. And he told me that I would be a teacher, and I told him I would not. But I did. So, yes, probably so.
So, did Pappy's service in the Navy influence you to also go into the Navy, or what influenced you?
That's probably the reason I joined the Navy. Ever since I can remember, Daddy was telling Navy stories, and I thought, I got to do that. Because he joined when Pearl Harbor was bombed. He volunteered just right away, and he enlisted for the duration of the war. It wasn't a certain amount of time. So when the war was over, they had to let him out. But he told a lot of funny stories, and a lot of stories that really, pretty serious stuff. He was always at a repair base. Him being a carpenter, he didn't have to go to boot camp or anything. They just put him to work. And he spent a lot of his time in the Caribbean, in Guantanamo Bay, and then in St. Thomas, and actually he went over to Northwest Africa for a little while at a Navy base.
Oh, wow.
And, but one of the funny things he told about was when he was down in the islands, that in their spare time they played baseball. He said they played with different rules down there. He said, when you got up to bat, well, if you hit the ball, you just kept running till they got you out. He said, well, I wasn't too good, but one time I hit the ball and it rolled out in about the middle of the field and went in a gopher hole. And he said, I made 27 home runs before they got the ball dug up and got me out. But his Navy stories, I guess, influenced me to join the Navy, and I didn't have the kind of experiences he did, but I really enjoyed my time in the Navy, and looking back, sometimes I wish I'd have stayed longer, but I'm glad to come home.
And you were stationed in Guam?
Yeah, I was in Guam for 2 years, and a normal time was 18 months, and you could apply for an extension. And I stayed 2 years, and I put in for another extension. I wanted to stay over there, and I didn't get my request in quick enough, so they sent me to San Diego. But I like Guam because, well, there was no big cities or nothing, but just country, and we got out in the hills and all, and just had fun.
So this is actually not my first time interviewing my dad. I've got to interview him several times for school projects when I was younger, and I remember one question I asked you was something along the lines of, how do you think our lives would be different if you had stayed in the Navy? And
Well, you wouldn't have been here, probably.
his exact answer was, well, you'd probably be half Guamanian. So, living in this area, in Mentone, Valley Head area, what do you think the greatest aspect of that was when you were growing up? That you've carried on with you throughout your lives?
The sense of community, the goodness of the people, it's just cleaner here and purer air. I know my grandma Shigley used to say she would go off she had 12 kids and they lived all over the country, and she'd go visit somebody, and when they started up the mountain, she'd say, phew, I could just breathe better on this mountain.
How about you?
Well, I hadn't really thought about it, but I just don't know of anywhere else I'd rather be.
That reminds me of another one of Daddy's stories. Daddy told this story, said there was a man lived here, and he had a whole bunch of kids, and they came to church. And they were having a revival, and so the preacher at the end of the service was having an invitation, and he told everybody to bow their heads and close their eyes. And this man, he had like 7 or 8 kids in the congregation, and he was looking around trying to see where all of his kids were so he could gather them up and take them home, when church was over. And the preacher said, sir, I asked you to bow your head and close your eyes. And the man didn't. And so the preacher said, sir, do you not want to go to heaven when you die? And the man said, well, I don't reckon so. I don't want to leave Mentone to go nowhere.
As a child, did you see or realize any hardships or challenges that your parents or the community itself went through.
Well, I guess things that happened, we didn't see as hardship, because it's just the way it was. We always had plenty to eat and plenty to wear, and we was happy, at least we thought we was. and most everybody around us is pretty much the same way, you know, I guess you call it contentment with just being here.
Yeah.
And I don't think the adults talked about their problems in front of their kids. We didn't,
Yeah.
if they had problems, we didn't realize it. We were, you know, sheltered from
One
problems
thing,
of the world.
one thing with our parents, cause they was married, what, 40, 50 something years?
55.
55 years, and I never heard a cross word between them my whole life. Now, if they had problems, we didn't know about it. And they just, you know, well, they just got along.
Yeah. I know as a child too, we never heard any crosswords either between them. So I think that was probably their whole lives. So say in the Mentone Valley Head area, were there certain places that you would go visit that were like historical then? And if not, if they like something that's maybe a little bit more historical now, and like how it became historical, or what the changes between then and now in that was.
Well, the big change is the two main Mentone landmarks no longer exist.
Yeah.
The hotel and the hitching post. That was two things that, you know, we remember since, you know, always remembered.
Yeah.
And I can remember when the post office was in the hitching post, and I remember going to the post office up there.
Daddy always took us on rides on Sunday afternoon, and we'd go places. I remember he took us to Scottsboro when they were about to close the ferry, because he wanted us to see the ferry before they closed it. He took us to Stevenson to see the
Power plant.
Just, I mean, you know, we went places and he'd tell us things that either were historical or were about to become historical. I remember he came in one afternoon and told us they'd paved the road from Mentone to the state park, and we had to drive down there to see. Yeah, that's been a while back.
I actually was looking through the archives of the Northeast annuals, and you know, I guess for my whole life, the 35 has always been paved, you know, as far as I can remember, and it's always been, you know, the 2 lanes on each side. And I was looking through the annuals, and I actually saw where that whole project, you know, from start to finish happened, and so that was kind of uncanny to me. And I know now, like there's a lot of roads up here that used to be just dirt roads when I was a kid. So it's a lot. There's things that are a lot different now than they were when I was little.
Unusual thing. Dad and his dad were carpenters, and back Martha Berry had a place out here, and she would send word to Dad that she was coming to Mentone to meet. She wanted him to meet her at the post office. She had a chauffeur that brought her out here, but he wasn't familiar with the road. So when she'd come to Mentone, she'd meet Daddy at the post office and tell her chauffeur to sit on the bench there in front of the post office till they got back. And she'd get Daddy to drive her around all over Mentone. I thought that's kind of unusual. Martha Berry get Daddy to drive her around she had a chauffeur and he sat on the beach at Mentone.
What are some of your best memories of your Pullen or do you have a lot of memories of your Pullen grandparents?
Well, Grandpa Pullen died before we were born. He died in
42.
1942. But Grandmother Pullen, I just adored her. She was really sweet. And she always had tea cakes in a tin box. And she taught me how to make paper dolls out of the newspaper by folding them. And I had cut some and I'd left them at Walt's house. They would hold hands and, and then we'd cut doilies out of the newspaper to put our tea cakes on when we ate them. And she was just so patient and kind and sweet. My other grandma was a prissy woman, and she cut switches off the lilac bush for use on my behind. And,
Because you had candy cigarettes.
oh, that's not all I got switchings for. But
What I remember
adored her.
What I remember about Grandma Pullen is when we'd be down there and if it was rainy and bad outside, she'd go outside and get sand and bring in the house and put sand in the floor for us kids to play in the sand.
What about Grandma Adams? What was some of your favorite memories of Grandma Adams?
Well, she taught me how to make tea cakes. And she taught me how to churn. And she always told me to be sweet. She was sweet, my mama was sweet, my daughter's sweet, but I think it skipped a generation.
I remember when Grandma would come to our house, Mother wasn't the greatest housekeeper because she had 5 little young'uns. And Grandma, it didn't matter, every time she came, she had to do something, cleaning the house.
She was a very clean housekeeper.
So recently, well, I don't know how far back it started, but I know you just gave us a copy of the book for Granny last year, and then some years before that, went on Pappy. So Aunt Linda has written little booklets, kind of on. I mean, some of it's historical, some of it's probably tall tales, especially on the Pappy book, of our family history and of just memories from the different people in our family and those kinds of things. So when did all of that start and what inspired you to start recording that?
Well, Daddy had so many stories, and I had a little yellow notepad where he had written down some of his stories. And so I just decided to write a whole book about him and include his stories, because none of his great-grandchildren, I mean, he died before any of the great-grandchildren were born, like my grandchildren and Walt's grandchildren. And so I just thought that would be a good way of keeping his memories. And then last year would have been Mother's 100th birthday, so I decided to write about her. And she has so many wonderful traits that I just thought her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and so I included you grandchildren. I asked each of you to contribute something of memory, and I was just blown away by what y'all said about her, because it was so sweet. You know, the grandchildren had such wonderful memories of my mother, their grandmother, that it just, and I think that's great for passing on down to the grandchildren not yet born yet, or great-grandchildren. You know, in Psalm 78 in the Bible, it tells us to tell your children, to tell their children the wondrous works of the Lord and the goodness of God, you know, and God blessed our family so with such, I mean, we've just been blessed beyond measure. And I think we need to pass that down.
I would agree. I think that was, I think the vast majority of us were actually very surprised how articulate my brother could be.
Yes.
We didn't know he knew how
Didn't
to
know he
use
had
those
that
words. So it was, both of them were quite lovely. It would, I look forward to telling, hopefully my grandchildren one day, be able to read those stories to them, and hopefully Dad maybe tell some tall tales to them like Pappy did for us. So what advice would you give future generations about the importance of family history? You listen?
Well, obviously, I think it's important, or I,
Wouldn't read a book.
because I write, you know, because I write down things to pass on.
Yeah.
I don't write down stuff, so I have to have notes.
So I'm sure, you know, children and grandchildren will watch this lovely video going on right now, but if they were in this room right now, what memory or wishes would you want to share with them that they can carry on to the next generations?
One thing is that they should always be kind to each other and to treat others like they want to be treated. And one thing that's impressed on us is to get an education. Our dad always encouraged us to get a good education and be the best we could be at whatever we do. And I think probably after we found some a letter from Sneed College. Dad, of course, they had a big family, and he made it through the 9th to 10th grade, didn't he?
Yes, and his older brother, who worked with his father, drowned in the river out here at Camp DeSoto. They were working at Camp DeSoto in the summer, and his older brother Jack drowned that summer. So Grandpa, who couldn't drive, had to take him to work with him to drive him there and back. And so Daddy had to quit school. But after my Aunt Eileen died, we found a letter that Grandma Pullen had kept all these years from Sneed College, of giving my father a scholarship for the last 2 years of high school, and if he made it on to college. And he didn't get to go because he had to go to work with his father. So education was really, and we never knew that until that, till Mother showed us the letter after he died. And he said, but he always said, I didn't have a chance to go on to school like you do, and so you go. And one thing he always said at the beginning of the school year, every year he'd say the same speech. And he'd tell us, you know, I expect you to do your lessons, you come home, do your homework. And I want you to do the best you can. You can always make all A's in your subjects, but you better make the A in conduct.
Did Did Dad always make an A comment?
I don't think I did.
Probably not with Miss Bowie anyway.
So, I'm gonna add a question. So out of the 5 of you children, who was the most mischievous?
Well, we always said Bob did.
He was the youngest, so he's got blamed for everything. I've done my share.
Yeah. So, today, at Northeast, we had, our speakers forum, which is where they bring in, authors and speakers to, tell about, their books or their literary works. And, during the Q&A time, right at the end of it, Dr. Noble, who was asking the questions, made a statement that just really stuck with me. And he said, family history is the history. And so I think that's probably one of the truest statements, because, history is made up of each individual family history. So it just really, really, really stuck with me. So I was very, very glad to get this moment in history with you two. So it's been such a good time to spend this time with y'all. Oh, yes.
This, there's a story behind this. This is a wood chain made out of one piece of wood. And the chain is something like 8 inches longer than the piece of wood was it was made out of. Never been glued together, it's all just carved out. The story behind this, according to Daddy,
Which may or may not be something.
he said, he started this chain when he was courting. He said when courting got done, he went to whittling. So you see how the chain turned out.
He made a small. Did he make that one for
This
his
one
courting
is from
also?
mahogany.
Yeah, he made that one while he's in Navy and made out of mahogany wood. It was from some of the islands where he was at. But this is red cedar, local wood here.
Those are great. Those are always. I remember those being in the chest or hanging up. Well, they were hanging up in your house. But I remember them being in the chest along with some other things from the Navy.
Yeah, he made a lot of course he was a carpenter and done a lot of woodwork in the Navy. And he made a footlocker, a wooden chest out of mahogany. And his commanding officer seen it when he made it. He said, "Pullen, can you make me one of them?" And Daddy told him, I said, "Well, Captain, yeah, I can make one, but on one condition." And he said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Make sure mine gets home." And so he went ahead and made the captain a chest like his. And then just before he left down there, the captain came to him and said, "Pullen, I need to tell you how I got your chest home." He said, "I had to send that as your personal effects." He said, "If something had happened to you down here," said, "nothing of your stuff would have got home." So he sent Daddy's chest home as his personal effects, like he'd been killed.
That's funny. So I think at this time we're going to kind of give opportunity for any of the people in the audience to ask any questions, or I don't know if you have a memory or something of the Pullen family, I guess if you want to share it.
I'd like to,
Okay.
especially with these here. I'm West Pullen, for y'all that don't know. My daddy and their daddy were brothers. My daddy was the youngest one, and after World War II, he went to pharmacy school and met my wife, and so I grew up in Birmingham. But the thing I remember the most about coming to Mentone, all my aunts and uncles lived up here. There was 7 of them up here. Is how important family was to all of them. And we always stayed at my Uncle Bill's, their parents' house, because they had a big house. And the thing that has always stuck with me the most was the Sunday lunches that we had while we're up here, and how much that tradition of eating together still goes on to this day. On Sundays, all of the aunts and uncles and the kids would come over with basically a potluck lunch at Uncle Bill's house. And you never seen more rambunctious children in your life. And to this day, the Pullen cousins, females, still get together every year and go do stuff. The boys were never that close, but I remember those were my fondest memories growing up, was coming up here and the times that we had in Mentone, especially the Sunday lunches. I don't know what y'all thought about them, but I love them.
I remember with the Sunday lunches of trying to figure out how that much food came out of Granny's kitchen when she was in church the whole time. And lunch was directly after church.
Yeah. Well, a lot of, like I said, when we did it, it was everybody brought one or two dishes, so it wasn't like one had to cook everything.
Right, yeah.
But those were some wonderful gathering time, and the stories and the food and homemade ice cream.
And I think about after those meals, all the men would go outside and they'd sit out under the trees and you'd hear some talking and then they'd all laugh. And they were telling each other their stories, I guess. But there was always laughter to go with the food.
Yep.
I've kind of wondered something with these oral histories. And there's two of you there, so you can argue about it if there's anything to argue about. But I've always wondered, you know, since you've spent your whole lives in this area, specifically here, do you feel like what you had for opportunities when you were young, you know, your late teens and your 20s, you know, to me, I was kind of raised similar, from similar grandparents. And I think, you know, like those family members that I got that are from that, still in that area, you know, they just did the work that was available, right? You know, as close to their interests as they could. And I wonder if it seems to y'all like that it is different now. Do you feel like your grandkids, you know, kind of have the same options along those lines, or do you feel like things have changed?
Okay, Walt, you've stayed here the whole time.
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to grow up and leave. I always wanted to go to town. Now I live in town and I want to come back.
Of course, the opportunities have changed. You know, back then, there was work here, you know, farming and sawmilling and stuff like that was local here. Now, you have to go somewhere else to work, for the most part.
Now, I would agree with that, with what Aunt Linda said is, if you don't mind if I chime in as well, is I grew up in Mentone. This was and still is my home. And as a young person, I didn't appreciate all that was here. It was too quiet. There was nothing to do. There wasn't the activities, you know, all of that. You know, I was kind of like, I was ready to go. I couldn't wait to be gone. And now looking with what my children do have, and so very grateful for the amazing opportunities they do have with, you know, a diverse education and those kind of things. But there's things that they do miss, and they miss out on being away and being in a larger place. It's Scottsboro. It's not huge. It's not like Tampa, Florida, or anything, but you know, it's larger. But we have absolutely no immediate family there where we grew up. I literally grew up in a house next door to my grandparents. And I feel like my children have missed out. Of course they get to see my parents, you know, but they missed out on the closeness of cousins and the Sunday lunches, every single week and that kind of stuff. So I think, they have amazing opportunities, but they've also missed out on a lot that being from a smaller area could have given them as well.
I've got a little story about Walt when they were kids.
Uh-oh.
Oh, yay.
My parents owned a grocery store and service station in Mentone for 32 years. It was just a local gathering place. Had a big one morning heater in the store, that's how we heated. And we lived in the back part, I grew up in it. But Bill, their daddy, would bring them down to the store, and they had several chairs around the store. But there was a little stool, homemade, about so long. And Walt and his sister, maybe two of them, I just remember, they would sit right there and never move the whole time they was in there. And they'd get an ice cream cone or a drink, and it was quiet. Most of the kids come in there raising cane for something sweet to eat. But they were always quiet and well behaved.
I remember one time we went to your daddy's store and Miss Catherine was gonna dip us some ice cream, and she asked Walt what kind he wanted, and he wanted blue. She didn't have any blue ice cream.
And there at the store, Daddy'd give me a nickel to get candy with. You get a pretty good mess of candy for a nickel back then. And your mom would get out a small sack to put my little handful of candy in, and I'd say, I want a big sack. Yeah.
So I should have read the article, Kelly, to know better when the hitching post was built. But what memories do you have of the hitching post? Obviously, you went there or did stuff there.
Just the post office is all I remember.
Really?
I wasn't involved in the upstairs.
Oh.
We were too young to go dancing. And I remember after the post office moved, then Clyde Lance had a beauty shop in there. And her niece, Janice, was my best friend. And she was an apprentice to Clyde. And I would go in there to, get Janice to fix my hair. And Clyde always fixed mother's. But that was something I remember about it. Going to the beauty shop.
I'm curious that each of you have notes that you've had in your hands, and I'm just curious to hear all of the stories, but what are one or two of the stories that maybe we haven't touched on that you've got?
I think you're pretty well covered.
I don't know, I haven't been looking at my notes.
And as you look at that, one thing I was curious about, like when you were in your teens and
That's
growing
right.
up with the family, were you expected to kind of work all the time to support things around the home and the
Oh,
property?
yeah. Yeah, we had chores, and of course, with our gardens and patches, Daddy always had a pretty big peanut patch and sweet potatoes and field peas. We was expected to do our part. And of course, we always had wood heat, fireplace and heaters, and would have to. Daddy, he didn't have a chainsaw, but them old chainsaws that you had to manually operate. The small stuff we had to cut up by hand, and a lot of time in the winter we wouldn't get wood up to the house where it's handy. One winter it got down below zero. I mean, it's cold for a couple of weeks, and snow on the ground or ice, and we didn't have enough wood up at the house. And it seemed like a half mile away at the time, but it wasn't that far. And me and my brother would take about a half a wheelbarrow load at a time, and it took both of us to get it to the house. Well, it was so cold, the hair in my nose froze up. And I couldn't breathe. And I thought, here I am over here in the woods, and I'm fixing to die. And they come to me, well, open your mouth, stupid. We didn't freeze. But we always had chores. And we did them because, you know, we knew there was consequences if we didn't.
And my sisters and I worked at Camp DeSoto in the summer after we got to be teenagers. We made $300 for the whole summer. We were rich.
And about of course, our great-grandparents had the house out here at the Murph House now. And I guess probably some of the first money I made was working for Grandma Shigley.
She hired Walt and me to work all day for her. She gave him a dime and me a nickel.
And on top of that, she had me cutting briars and bushes out of the fence out behind the house, and I lost my knife. And only got paid a nickel or a dime. And that's the worst part, was losing my knife.
Why did you only get a nickel and he got a dime?
Cause he was a boy and I was a girl. She didn't know anything about women's liberation, equality.
And Walt, you still care you tend those grounds, right?
Yeah.
There used to be an apple orchard there?
Well, yeah. Part of it was, I can remember, the part of it was in a pasture, and they had a cow. But I remember out in front of the house was, I guess it's all different kind of fruit, but no, it's mostly apples, I think.
So you don't get paid for that now, though, right? So your grandma was paying you better than what you did.
I think
That's my therapy.
there's still one of those apple trees that's living. Isn't
Yeah,
there?
they're slowly dying though, when the apples aren't good anymore.
You remember our Easter egg hunt was in your grandparents over there in your little pasture area. Our school Easter egg hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember the time we walked from the school through the woods to the babies and had a bonfire and a Wiener roast? Do you remember that?
Yeah,
That was
nice.
We walked all the way through the woods to Baby Sawmill and then had a bonfire with Wiener roast and marshmallows. That's when Mr. and Ms. Adams were in Moonlight.
I have some of my grandmother's old journals, and it seems like people socialized more back then than we do now.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you talk about that?
Well, every Sunday, we was either at somebody's house or people was at our house, you know, go home from church. I know, the Crow family, we was down there and they was at our house just a whole lot. And, I can't remember, it seemed like it's others. Of course, a lot of times you just go riding. If you saw somebody sitting on the porch, you just stop and visit.
And Mother used to walk to the neighbors, like to your grandmother's house and to the Cootses and
Beans.
to the Baines. I mean, you know, they'd walk and they'd take flower cuttings and they'd swap sacks, you know, like the flour sacks and feed sacks and things. They had patterned ones and they would swap them with each other, like, okay, I've got one like this and you've got two like that, you know, let's swap and get enough to make a dress or something. That was precious times with neighbors just, you know, visiting and sharing. And now we get in our own car and go somewhere.
Speaking of car, I think you should tell about your mother's incident with
Mother, she didn't learn to drive until, well, I can remember when we was little, she drove anyway. After Dad died, Mother drove, and she never, 45 mile an hour was wide open for her. I mean, she never drove over 45. She was going to, I think she's going to a doctor one day in Fort Payne, and she came by here, and during school starting and school got out, the police had sat here in front of the church. Well, she was coming back 45 mile an hour. And there's sign out there, speed limits 35 during, 2 hour time or whatever. Well, she was doing 45. Well, she got on by and the police pulled out behind her, and she just kept going. And he just blinked his headlights. She just kept going. Finally, he turned on the blue lights. She just kept going. Well, by then she'd got almost up to Mentone, and he finally turned on the siren. Well, she pulled over there where the wide place road there where the market is now, and he pulled in behind her and got out and said, "Miss Pullen," or said he wanted to see her license. And so she showed him her license, and he said, "Miss Pullen, didn't you see me back there?" She said, "Yeah, you could have passed me anytime you wanted to." And she died thinking nobody knew she got stopped for speeding. And that day just happened to be some election up at town hall. Well, the police, it tickled him. So he went back up to town hall telling about Miss Pullen speeding. And, in 2 hours, everybody in Mentone knew that Miss Pullen had been stopped for speeding. But she never let on, and it got to where she didn't drive, and we'd take her to Fort Payne, and every time we get her, "You better slow down, the police may be over here." But she never said she got stopped for speeding.
Well, I do believe our time's up for the day, for the interview process itself, but
You have told some great stories.
yeah,
We've enjoyed it.
it's been good. So, do you have anything?